started using air power, they had to bring in some guys to go ahead and be the targeting experts for fighters. And the fighter pilots were assigned targets. The targeting list was very political in the Vietnam War. The president would take national resource assets, commonly called reconnaissance, and go ahead and find targets. And he would list them. He'd send it down to his staff. And the staff would add targets. And then it would go down to JCS, and they added targets. Then it went to Hickam, Hawaii headquarters, where they added targets. We're talking about across date lines. We're talking about reconnaissance finds a truck on a road. 48 hours later, this targeting list dribbles on down to Vietnam, where they take all these targets and match them up with all these 10 different wings of fighters, each one having about 70 aircraft. So we're talking about 700 fighters in Vietnam and Thailand. And they would divvy up the targets, and sometimes they'd hit the target at the same time or hours apart. Same target, hours apart. And like I say, that truck isn't going to be there 48 hours later. So the forward air controller was sent out to help the fighter pilots find the target. The fighter pilot flying along at 28,000, 30,000 feet, doing 450 knots, and is given a set of coordinates. He's looking out the window, that looks about right. If he hits within 10 miles, he's lucky. And so they send the forward air controller over there to go ahead over. Essentially, we were trained to go ahead and know exactly what the coordinates and find it on the map, and go ahead and identify exactly what those coordinates were. And if that truck wasn't there anymore, we moved over and kept hunting until we found a truck that would be reasonably close to what the president identified he wanted to have hit 48 to 72 hours before. And one of the other sections of the rules of engagements was when you find a target that really isn't the original location, you had to orbit and watch it until it was struck. So here's this guy down there in the ground looking up and sees this guy orbiting right over the top of him. And says, uh-oh. So now what does he do? Well, there were other rules that were always established by the president down through the staff to the headquarters in Vietnam. And by the 70s, what happened was our commanders over there were ticket punching. And their tickets, how well they did on their efficiency reports, was based on the least amount of damage done to their assets under their control. So they ruled engagements away, bullet holes, and deaths for air control as well as the fighters. So the net result was forward air controllers had to operate higher and higher and higher and higher altitude with binoculars and looking around. And that's the proper set of coordinates. Give an example of one of the thread of these rules of engagements that came down. Trucks, for instance. The president said you couldn't hit a truck in Haiphong Harbor. Well, that's the best place to get the truck because that's where the war materials are coming off the boats. It won't be distributed if you get them there. But the rationale was you don't want to do collateral damage to the French freighter sitting next to the Russian freighter. Even though the French freighters are loading war materials as well, you can't have collateral damage. So you couldn't hit them in there. And then the Secretary of State added the rule onto there, once again, this thread of trucks. You can't hit a truck on a major highway in North Vietnam because you may injure a civilian truck driver. You ever heard of that before? Well, couldn't do it. And then the Department of Commerce says you can't hit a truck within 5 miles of the border of North Vietnam and Laos along any trail because it may interfere with commerce. Irrespective of the fact there was no villages, cities, towns large enough to conduct any commerce between the two, but of course he didn't know that, and so you couldn't hit one of those. Then the Department of the Air Force says you can't hit a truck that is going northbound. The rationale is war materials are being shipped southbound, going north, there's nothing on it, don't waste your assets taking out a truck that's going northbound, nothing on it. And then MACV headquarters says you can't hit a truck more than 100 meters off the side of the road. Well, once again, this guy's watching this guy orbiting, goes off 100 feet, where he turns around, starts heading north, and you couldn't hit him anymore. Right underneath your eyes. eyes. You watch this thing. And the rules were just like that for everything. And average fighter pilot had to take one test once he came in combat. And it was a 10-question test, same test 14 years. And it was on the same sheet of paper. And all you had is a little small 2-inch wide strip that you put on the left. You marked A, B, C, D. And all you had to do was pick up. This one is really marked a lot. That's probably the answer. If he couldn't get 100%, he didn't want to fly combat. And we, forward air controllers, we had to take a test once a month, 100 questions for each military region we flew in South Vietnam on the rules of engagement. If we got less than 85%, we were grounded. We could only fly with an instructor until we retook the test and got above 85%. So we were always studying the rules, and the more you study them, the more asinine they became. It was just ridiculous. They really hamstrung us. We couldn't do anything. Okay, so forward air controllers went out, found the target, and then put in the fighter. And that was his job. There were about 500, anyway, time there 350 to 500 forward air controllers in South Vietnam associated with various other units there, the Army, specifically the U.S. Army, and the North or South Koreans, and the Australians who were all there. And we had forward air controllers assigned to them to help troops in contact for close air support. But when the Air Force separated from the Army back in the 40s, the Air Force was Air Corps, the Army Air Corps, was run by a bunch of bomber pilot generals, and they got in a big powwow with their superiors in the Army, and they decided these rules between the two, who had responsibility for what, so we weren't moving across each other's boundary. And one of the rules was the new fledgling Air Force general said, you can't fly fixed-wing aircraft dropping bombs and supporting yourself. You have to rely upon the Air Force to do that. And the Army looked at them and said, no, wait a minute. You guys fly bombers. I mean, you're going to do troops in contact, close air support with bombers? And these guys said, yeah, well, we'll give you some fighters. He spoke to the Army and said, okay, we demand that you have 3 fighter pilot qualified pilots be forward air controllers in our units at the brigade level and 2 more at division level. And these guys got to be fighter pilot qualified. And Air Force General says, yeah, you can have as many fighter pilots you want. We don't like much international. So that's where you had a separation between forward air control. You had AFAC, BFAC, and I like to say there's another third category called CFAC. AFAC was a fighter pilot qualified guy who had an AFSC, Air Force Specialty Code, of flying fighters. And the BFAC was a guy who didn't have that qualification. The BFAC could not do close air support, troops in contact with the U.S. Army. He could do it for the Aussies and for the South Vietnamese they were assigned to. Because we all know that the U.S. Army grunts work more than the Aussie grunt. The South Vietnamese were the South Korean general grunts. And speak up?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Air Force suddenly had a problem. How are we going to get these guys to volunteer to pick up their blowtorch, go down, live with the grunts, go out in the field with a backpack radio on his back, and conduct airstrikes from out there, or fly propeller-driven airplanes, and didn't have no volunteers. So the Air Force, in wisdom, said, tell you what we'll do. We'll go ahead and take guys straight out of pilot training. We'll go ahead and send them to Clovis, America, Cannon Air Force Base, have them check out in T-33 for 1 week, how to drop bombs, less them as fighter pilots, and send them over. The Army will never know the difference.
Wow.
And that's what was happening in the 70s, beginning of 69, 70, 71, 72. So here I am. I'm an F-100 pilot. I'm a bachelor. A little loophole in the Air Force is if you have a 3-year assignment, stateside assignment, you can go ahead and have that truncated and terminated in 1 year and involuntarily move him over to some other assignment. So here I am, John R. Sanderson, young lieutenant. You're going to Vietnam in 3rd Brigade, 101st Airborne Division. So off I go. I get there, And I'm surrounded by these other three guys in the 3rd Brigade, 101st Airborne Division, living out of a bunker in the bottom of below ground in Camp Evans, just north of Da Nang. And these other three guys I'm with, they're AFACs, but they were the Clovis guys. My commander, living in Da Nang, flew OV-10s, and he had about 80 of us under his command. He was SR-71 pilot. But coming down the ticket punch, you had to get a operational combat unit to go ahead and get a nice efficiency report. So he was he's kind of a guy who liked metrics. He liked to go ahead and look at numbers. And of course, in that time period, the Army and the Navy or Air Force were always competing as to who could drop the most bombs and how many people were killed. It was just statistics was all it was. This guy comes up, this commander, and he notices I have the best bomb damage assessment results of any of the other forward air patrollers. He says either he's lying, which is court-martial defense, or he's violating the rules of engagement, which is also court-martial defense. So he came up to fly with me one day. And I took him up. Now, being an ex-fighter pilot, I know that the first pass made by a fighter is a Hail Mary. Throws that bomb out there, says, there it is, okay. I'll go ahead and get a little closer this time before I roll in. The second pass, he gets closer to target. The third pass, he can go ahead and get really, really close. So what do? Having flown fighters and dropped bombs before, I realized 95% of those first passes are about 200 meters short. Typically what happens is he's not used to the terrain, 30-degree dive bomb, and bombing is just nothing but a bunch of mathematics. It's just a simple trigonometry process. You have distance, altitude, slant range. You can figure out 30-degree dive bomb. At this speed, you know exactly where to go ahead and drop that bomb and you pull off. It's just a simple case of mathematics. Well, normally what happens is the first time he rolls in, he's a little short, shallow. He rolls in, he gets to his release altitude on this trigonometry figure, and his pipper is way short, his aiming device. So he pulls it up to the target, so the gun camera film comes out real clear, pickles it off, boom, bomb goes 200, 300 feet short. So what I do is I lie about the winds. I give him more of a headwind component. So he now has to adjust his reticle and gets close to the target. Or I go ahead and fudge the altitude of the target, which kind of changes the trigonometry geometry of the ball to get him to hit the target in the first pass. So that's how I got the best bomb damage assessment. I lied to the fighter pilots. So commander's sitting in my right seat. He never dropped a bomb in his life. He goes back and he says, well, I came to give you a little check ride to see if your bomb damage assessment was a lie or was a truth. He said, looks like you were spot on as far as that goes. But he said, you lied to the fighter pilots about the wind. I said, I beg to differ with you. I said, you think of winds as being smoke rocket hits the ground, winds drift to the south at around 35, 40 knots, and that's the wind you get. He said, yeah. I said, no, I use cloud shadows. He said, that's the release altitude of the bomb. And use that because that's the inertia on the bomb as it leaves the platform. And that's the important component of it all. And he says, well, I never thought about that. I got away with it. I was counting on the fact that maybe he didn't know where the shadows were really going. He wasn't paying attention. Well, he lied about that to the fighter pilots. But anyway, he comes up and says, you lied about the elevation target. I said, no, they can give you that too. I said, you thinking of the elevation target as based on the grid MOA and minimum obstruction altitude and so forth. The fighter pilot doesn't impact the ground on the pull-off. He said, yeah. I said, no, I use the actual target elevation. That's what you're supposed to use because that's part of the trigonometry involved of the setup. And I said, so I give him that. He said, I never thought about that. I said, besides, the fighter pilot, the bomb tables are based on 1 G per second, 5 G pull-off. We all know fighter pilots love to reef and steep. And he goes in, drops the bomb off, boom, throws in about 7, 8 Gs in half a second, gets out of there, and the wings go white and everything. I said, bomb tables are built on the fact that when you come down, drop your bomb, 1 G per second, 5 G pull-off, you don't hit the bomb envelope because the bomb essentially is paralleling the fighter as it's going down. And if he continues down too close, it's going to go ahead and get some damage. So it isn't a factor if you give him the real elevation, which is the bomb tables are built on. So he goes away with a newfound respect. about a month later, I used to, as I said, I lived with the Army for those months. And the Army, when you came back to debrief of a bomb pass, you gave him, he wanted to know everything about that whole situation. He wanted you to go from a letter to form into a word, into a phrase, into a sentence, into a paragraph, into a chapter, into a book. He wanted to know everything about that. He wanted to know the individual call sign of each of the fighters, what direction you put them in from, the ordnance they were dropping, how many bombs they dropped off in each pass, what was the result of each one of them, why you chose the direction to run in that you chose. They want to know everything. Well, I had an aircraft that needed an hour inspection, and I diverted it into the headquarters area. And I went into the Air Force Intelligence Debrief Facility, and this thing was like an auditorium. And it has these 5-foot divider walls and cubicles, and intelligence airmen sitting in there, bored to death with his pencil out. And the typical Air Force debrief says aircraft call sign, how many fighters there were, time on, time off target, any bomb damage assessment, next. Didn't care about any of the rest. So I go walking in there, used to giving the debrief, forming the letter into a word, into a phrase, into a sentence, and a paragraph, chapter, book. And I'm going into this airman sitting there and just, wow, you never heard any of this before. And he's writing it all down. And I gave him the summary, which was the last thing the Army wanted. And anything you saw during your 2.5-hour flight, that would be significant importance to the U.S. Army. And I said, in the demilitarized zone, the Vietmen are coming through the zone on this contour line. They're chopping down the trees about 6 to 9 inches high. And they come along this contour line, and I showed them on a map. And I said, the only thing that could possibly come down between this path is either tanks or APCs, or personnel carriers. That's the only thing that can come down there. Palm Tree is probably going to come under attack within 3 weeks. The commander was in the next booth over. He stood up, looked over the top of the 5-foot divider and said, how high were those trees? Jumped about that high. By rules of engagement, what's the minimum altitude in the buffer zone? I said, 6,000 feet. He says, you can't see 6 to 9 inches from 6,000 feet. And I said, well, I use my binoculars, and I take that to mean don't dwell below 6,000. You're grounded. He said, you're going up to a palm tree. You can sit there and wait for that attack to come. And I said, I might be volunteering for the Ravens. And he says, I already have you in for the Ravens. You're dangerous. You're going to be a black mark on my record. I can't afford to keep you any longer. You're going to go and get a bullet hole in that airplane. Then I have to explain all this stuff, and it's going to be a bad mark on me. So I got my orders over the Ravens. Palm Tree came under attack for 4 weeks. I was 1 week off. So, what am I saying here? Forward air controllers that tend to gravitate toward the Raven program were guys who got fed up with the rules, went and fudged on them a few times, just enough not to get court-martialed, and got fed up with the whole damn situation. So I got to get out of this chicken outfit. And we ended to gravitate over there. Some of us, it was a choice. Court-martial, exciting assignment. I'll take this exciting assignment. And that's how we ended up where. Now, how many of them were there of us? 137 of us flew under the call sign Ravens in the course of 7 years. Of those 137, 23 of us were killed. Of the remaining 112 or so, 88 of us ended up getting shrapnel damage or bullet holes in us sometime during that remainder of our tour. We lost about 130 airplanes either mechanically fell out of the sky on us due to maintenance or shot down. So we have the highest casualty rate of any outfit in the Southeast Asia. And you got to say, wow, this is not survivable. We volunteered, went over there, we completed our tour in 1 year. So I only had 5 months in Vietnam, and I spent 7 months over there in Laos. Yes?
What plane were you flying?
I was flying the O2, the Skymaster. So, I guess what you all want to know is what's the real difference between Vietnam and Laos? Well, in Vietnam, we had those rules. And we had 500 guys there in Vietnam doing the job. There was about 500,000 total number of troops in South Vietnam with news media embedded with us, and daily reports of Walter Cronkite reporting on the news, and it was crazy thing about it was, of that 500,000, there were only about 20,000 were actually doing any combating. And any one day, there were only about 1,500 to 1,800 were actually in the tip of the spear, doing the chucking. And the rest was all support. And we in the Air Force were considered support. The bombers, fighter bombers and so forth were considered support for the war effort. So if you take some of those guys who are really the shooters, and there's only about 7-8% of us that you would consider the shooters, the guys really out there to do some damage. The rest of the guys are just trying to get by for a year, finish up their tour, and get out of it and go back to follow the rest over in Europe, stateside, and get out, or whatever the case may be. So he had those rules, great numbers of people, only flew about every second or third day. The rest of the time was time off to keep rest a little bit. And under threat of court-martial under any term of the events. In Laos, in Vietnam, rule books were left there. And we had to study them all the time. In Laos, the air attaché gave us a single sheet of paper, typewritten, double spaced, how to get around the rules and manuals. It was a totally different environment. Now, here's the rub. When the guy went from the Raven, or from the normal Air Force path, chain of command, you always have someone that you report to and someone that may report to you. It's just a chain. In Laos, we were spit out in that whole chain, sent over to the State Department, which is important to the military generals, out of their control, and we were over there under the U.S. ambassador through the State Department. And when the generals ever found out who we were while we were still on duty, our career was terminated. Wherever we were, whatever rank we were, and they found out that we did this job, we were spit out, gone, never to be returned. Many of us kept our mouths shut, continued the rest of our Air Force career. We went into these various other assignments. They come up and say, well, in Vietnam, the average combat time was 35 to 40 hours a month. In the Ravens, the U.S. ambassador waived us to 175 combat hours a month. When we got to that, he sent us down under his dime, down to Bangkok, 2 days in the hotel. Now, you send a 20-year-old kid down to Bangkok, hotel paid for and everything. You can only imagine what kind of trouble we get into. We come back up, crawling back up the country, and our elbows and our knees saying, "Let me back in combat so I can rest." And that's the way it was in Laos. It was just a total different environment. Now, some people thought we were Air America. A lot of our military compatriots thought we had gone to Air America. Air America, what a neat name. You know, you can't get a better name than that. It just sounds so covert. But in actuality, they were the professionals. Their motto, anything, anywhere, anytime, says it all. They were very professional about it. We'd walk down the ramp with our various civilian dress that we'd wear. I mean, one guy, dressed like Klinger, MASH, he wore dresses. He wore all these weird outfits. And he'd go flying that way. And Papa Fox was his name. Johnny Reinhardt. Papa Fox, just like fighter pilots, we all picked up nicknames. Most of the time, those nicknames are assigned to you, and they're not very flattering. Something early in your career that you did, you just as soon forget about it. Papa Fox was Porcus Fornicus. And we have two theories on how he derived that name. One was he always was a go ugly early kind of a guy, but the better one I thought was his definition of a perfect 10 was 5 2s. It wasn't quality that counts, son, it's quantity. And that's just the type of guy who gravitated toward this job. Then there was the other guy, Magnanass, Red Platt, got shot down 8 times. In the movie Air America, remember that one little statement that Mel said, "I crash airplanes better than anybody else I know"? That was actually a quote from Papa Fox. I'm not Papa Fox, but Magnanass.
Magnanass, okay.
So, I guess you all want to hear some stories. I've been in the Raven about 3 months, and normally what we had, the way we got away with what we did was we always had, not always, most of the time, we had the guy in our back seat was a Laotian infantry officer. It was his country. He could tell me where I could pick my bomb. I just say, hey, is it okay over here? He'd get on the radio and make certain there weren't any troops, friendly guys anywhere near. He said, yeah, guess where, go ahead. And he gave me my proving authority. In Vietnam, if that truck had moved, and I have to go ahead and now try and hit this target that wasn't where it was 72 hours ago. I started setting my orbit, everything goes to hell. You have to do what is called a validation request. You got to send into an airborne command control center upstairs that you want to set of fighters. I prefer Mark 82s, Mark 81s, 500 and 250 pound bombs with nickel or dime delays, 0.05 or 0.1 second delays. And this is the rendezvous point and time on station. How much fuel do I have left to go ahead and put this guy in? He would send it to an intelligence facility someplace and get approval. And this whole process took 45 minutes. So here you are orbiting this truck for 45 minutes. And guess what? He lands. He's gone. That was just the way it was. In Laos, we go ahead and call up the airborne command and control ship upstairs and say, hey, send me all the air in the world. I got a target down here. And they say, okay, Raven, I'm sending you a gunfighter flight to be here in 2 minutes. And it was instantaneous. They knew we didn't have to go through some full colonel or a general to go ahead and get approval to go ahead and drop that bomb. And we were our own approving authority. And once again, that was abhorrent to the military. One more reason why we got spit out as soon as we returned to the United States if they found out we did it. So, I'm out one morning. There were only about 2 rules the ambassador had for us. Number 1 was every month somebody in your village threw a party for other American speaking or English speaking people in the village. That was rule number 1. Number 2, no single engine airplanes could fly at night. It was very simple because to fly at night, all the enemy has to do is just lay out on a big old field, point the rifles upstairs, and wait for the noise and just shoot. Blanket the whole area, and they'll get you. Now, a twin engine airplane, you go ahead and put the throttles out of sync, and then wop, 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 is omnidirectional. You can't tell where it is. So that was his rationale. You would not go ahead and send out single engine airplanes at night. Well, being used to fudging the rules a little bit, I used to take off every now and then about a half hour before sunrise. Viet Minh knew this, that we weren't allowed to take off till sunrise. So they just look at their tables and know it's 7:42 in the morning, and they had a half hour because that's about how long it took me to get out the airport, take off, and get to the working area. So they had about a half hour, actually a full hour of relatively light, twilight as well as after sunrise, to go ahead and hide things. Well, if I took off a half hour early, I'd catch them in the act. So what happened was the previous week, I'd fly around the villages and look around in areas nowhere near the friendly troops. And I look down there and I see this peaceful village. And here are what I call the trick-or-treat boys, the Buddhist novices, walking the streets with their orange robes on, collecting food from the females in the village and little morsels to feed the monks in the pagoda. And I fly over the village the next day, and there's no trick-or-treat boys. Number 1. Then I go ahead and come back the next day and just fly off the side of the same village, not letting the folks down there know that I'm actually spying on that village. And I'm going by, and there's a water buffalo in this farmer's rice paddy. Well, if that farmer were still there, that water buffalo wouldn't be grazing in there. Number 2. Next morning, I'd take off half hour early. My backseater would have a radio, a North Vietnamese radio, and I'd fly over there and I'd see wispy little trail of smoke fires that they were just putting out. 5 or 6 different clumps of woods around there. That's where they're at, with that smoke fire. They just get rid of the campfire for the night. Okay. So I go up to 4,500 feet, magic altitude. For no one bird dog, a really small airplane, 4,500 feet is really small. And by the time the muzzle velocity of the bullet traveled through 4,500 feet and got to you, it just bounced off the skin. It dimpled the skin. If it got through, it would just go ahead and might bruise you in the foot or never get through the seat cushion. So it wouldn't get you. We were impervious. Yeah, we take a couple of bullet holes every now and then, but, no big deal. And I I go over the top of this thing, 4,500 feet in orbit, grab his radio. Hey, Nguyen, Ho Chi Minh eats shit. Hey, Nguyen, Ho Chi Minh likes little boys. Hey, Nguyen, and all this sort of stuff. This poor radio interpreter on the ground. You can just imagine him. Commander right next to him. What's he saying? What's he saying? No. Finally, his voice would come up. Oh, sir, please stop it. Hey, is El Comandante there? Yeah, he hears. Well, tell El Comandante. I think he likes little boys. Tell El Comandante. Blah, blah, blah. Tell El Comandante. Now, of course, here's this commander on the ground saying, hey, he's talking about me. He's talking about me. What is he? What's he saying? Finally, he can't stand it anymore. They start shooting everything they had. Beating mortar rounds and anything up at me. Gotcha. And I have a set of T-28s who just finished their breakfast. You know, it's a civilized war after all. You know, we don't do anything before 8:30 in the morning, and they show up and take them out. So that was one of the little gimmicks I used to do. So I'm out there one day early, and I find this tank being bulldozer in front of it, trying to shove it back into a tunnel. Because this tank had thrown a tread, and they're feverishly trying to get this all together and zipped up before a half hour after sunrise. And I blew that. And I come overhead, and I'm in a one-man war. I get down there at 200-300 feet, and I'm shooting my guns out the window. And I would carry an AK-47, a CAR-15, a 45, a 38, and an M79 is what I flew with. And no survival gear whatsoever. Didn't wear a parachute. And just nothing but ammunition. Just about Frito ammunition. And I'm carrying on this one-man war. The trouble is, T-28 pilots are at breakfast. Hey, Raven, haven't you heard? It's a civilized war. So I called up, well, let me try and see if we got any air power. I called up the Airborne Command Control ship upstairs. And he says, hey, Raven, haven't you heard? There's a war going on in Vietnam today. We don't have any assets available to you. So I'm marshaling my bullets. I'm running around one side of the tank, and they're running around the other side, keep protected. I'm flying over there, and they're running around the other side. It's musical chairs going on here. And finally, I thought, well, let me go back to the Vietnam way. Let me go ahead and do a validation request. It can't take 45 minutes. That's about the time T-28s will show up. I'll see if I can only shoot 5 or 6 bullets instead of 45 and 50 each pass. And I cacked up the coordinates, encrypted them. I said, prime mover to target. I want Mark 82s, Mark 81s with 0.10 delay. Concept being the probability of the fighter actually hitting the target would only dust the antennas off the tank. I wanted that bomb to barely miss it, drive underneath, explode, and flip the tank over. And in the process, the underbelly of a tank is very soft. I can finish it off with my 45 caliber pistol.